On the third week of May 2025, I was in London for work, and I spent several evenings in the theater district talking to locals and tourists about their convictions. I found Nick talking to a friend behind the National Portrait Gallery where he works, and he was thrilled at the opportunity to share his thoughts about the nature of Scripture, the comparison to contemporary fantasy literature, why science is a good reason to disbelieve sacred writings, and why lying to ourselves might actually be a good thing. My name is also Nick, and this is Conversations on the Coast.
Hi.
Good evening. Would one of you be interested in doing a short interview?
What's it on?
So I do a podcast about critical thinking and metacognition.
Ooh, interesting.
And so
yeah.
I talk to people about something that they're convinced is true, and then we have a dialogue about about the sufficiency of your reason to support your confidence.
Okay, I'm totally in for that.
Awesome.
Sure.
Cool. My name is Nick.
Hi, I'm Nick as well.
Are you?
Hey!
I've met so many Nicks since I came to London. It's crazy.
That's
right.
Nick.
Okay. Cool.
You enjoy Nick Squid.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Cool.
It's a little Nick on Nick here.
A little Nick on Nick action.
Cool. So what brings you down to Leicester Square tonight?
Well, actually, I work in the National Portrait Gallery.
Oh, wonderful.
So yeah, literally just finished work.
Yeah.
And is a post-work chat.
Awesome.
With one of my friends.
That's great.
Yeah.
And now another post-work chat with some random stranger.
Random guy on the street. Yeah, 100%.
Awesome. Cool.
So I guess it's difficult. I'm interested by the notion of what you're saying.
Yeah.
Of these truths, because I've been really looking at. I'm atheist. I just want to say that off the bat.
Yeah, sure.
But really looking into mainstream religion and sort of the ideas. I guess what they set in place.
Yeah.
I find really fascinating, because I find it fascinating that essentially religious texts are sold as non-fiction.
Right.
And this idea I find so peculiar.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, how does that make sense? In a rational world,
yeah.
It's one thing to have it as its own separate category of religious studies and things like that, but to sell it as non-fiction, I find so interesting. And also, as I guess I do art. I wouldn't necessarily call myself an artist, but so looking at the history of art and how, in the northern and southern Renaissance times, there was this bloom of visionary literacy of art, but sort of translating through religion, and you saw these depictions and stuff.
Yeah.
And going through that and looking at, I'm also reading Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
And I'm seeing this sort of comparison of if this can be non-fiction, then why can't this also be non-fiction? Because it can still hold those same beliefs and tenets of, light and dark, good and evil, this moral overview. And Tolkien was extremely religious, a devout Christian, monotheistic, and a lot of the Silmarillion, these later texts that came from it.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting looking at that of why do people hold that as a truth?
Okay.
But personal truths that I hold is a difficult one to answer, because I don't necessarily know what truths
Well, I
there
wonder
are.
if the thing that's kind of emerging out of this is the claim would be the Bible is fiction.
Yeah.
Is that something that you are convinced is true?
Yeah.
Is that what you want to talk about, or do you think you have something else in there that's lurking?
I don't know, because I feel like it's just been done to death, hasn't it, really? I would like to say there was something new and interesting, but it's just the thing that's been on my mind.
Yeah.
I guess it's difficult to prove that it's not fiction in the likelihood that it is fiction. I just think, the human fallacies of translation, of having an original text and then having it translated through numerous generations, things will get lost in translation.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to then sort of find that original text and sort of use either modern analytical tools or things like that to really delve deep into what it's going, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, to say that it's fiction, I can say with a relative degree that it is.
One of the first things I like to do is take it out of the binary black and white category and say,
100%.
what is your level of confidence on a scale of 0 to 100
that
the Bible is fiction?
Fiction. Well, it's not just the Bible. I don't just want to say. I feel like religion and organized religion as a
religious
whole
texts are fiction.
Yeah, 100%.
So the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita,
the Torah,
Guru
all of
Granth
it.
Sahib, all
of them are They're definitely fiction.
Okay.
Whether I don't know, did they start off as it? Who knows?
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those.
But like on a scale of 0 to 100, right? Where do you how confident are you that religious texts are fiction?
It's like 100%. I'm pretty sure. I'm like pretty sure. Yeah.
So, what does 100% mean to you, right? If you're at 100% confidence,
with certainty, you know, with if you're 100% at anything, which very rarely I am, you know, I feel like everything is always there's always two sides of some sort, and quite often the grey area in between this black and white is actually where the narrative sort of comes into like a relative form. But with religion, I think when you look at, once again, I don't want to be like, oh, you look at, you know, fucking evolution and stuff like that, like, you know, because it's such a sort of opinion. But at the same time, how do you translate this idea of factualness when, you know, 200-300 years ago, the smallest thing you could observe was with your eye?
Yeah.
It's through these more modern techniques, I guess, that we have that we can actually say, oh, well, you know, these things happen for a reason, and it's not because of God. Yeah. It's because of genuine scientific belief. And then religion, then... So we're kind of getting into your reasons, which I definitely want to get to. Cool. But in the confidence, does 100% mean that you could not be wrong? Yeah, 100%. Okay, so you don't think there's anything that could be. Is there anything that you could learn that would make you more confident? Yeah, but I think it's beyond the scope of what we're currently at. Okay. You know, I think, have you seen that Futurama episode where they have the sniffalizer and Bender goes missing into the cosmos, and Fry and Leela go to like these sort of monks in the Himalayas and they have this like sniffalizer scope that can sniff out the universe, and it sort of comes across God, and that's what they're looking for to sort of like definitively prove that this is what's around. Okay. And they completely miss it, but Bender comes across. Yeah. And it's a really interesting episode, and I think it highlights this. Yeah. You know, that there are probably things that would maybe change my opinion. Okay. But they would be so radical and so far from what organized religion really says. Sure. That it then becomes its own thing that disproves religion in itself, and now becomes a separate entity. Okay. Where it's much more... So the only thing you can think of that would change your confidence would also change the nature of the claim. Of what religion actually means within itself. Sure. 100%. Okay, cool. All right. So now let's get to... Oh, I did want to define the word fiction, because I think that kind of has a lot of nuance in it. It does. So what do you mean when you say that the Bible is fiction? So religious text. Religious not text, specifically as the Bible. Scripture. I would say it's works of the human mind and the human imagination. Yeah. You know, I'm sure in the early days, religion really held such a moral compass towards people. You know, in societies in a world where not necessarily there was lots of despair, but the world was quite bleak, you know, like you could die sort of at the drop of a hat, and it's all because your moral fiber wasn't really that strong, you know, whereas, you know, it was just crime and punishment was so barbaric in what you're doing, and it's so regimented, and equally the resources that were available you don't necessarily have because we don't have modern agriculture and things like that, so it was much more of like a dog-eat-dog sort of world, and to rise above that you need this moral fiber. But it's still a work of the human mind, regardless of the stories that they're telling. Yeah. Whether it has potentially happened or not, it's still heavily sort of adapted and edited. That the root message might maybe be true, but it's no longer its original form, which makes it that form of fiction. Does intention change this at all? Like, does it have to be something that was intended to be fiction, or could it be something where could somebody write something that they honestly believe and it's still fiction? Yes and no. I would say more on the no, but more of like, you know, if on that scale of 1 to 100 is set like a 10% of no. You know, in that like it might have happened through some, you know, trial and tribulation that you've gone through. but you're not accurately depicting that thing. It's the moral message.
Okay.
And it's within that moral message, I guess, that religious texts subscribe to.
Yeah.
And so then that becomes fiction. But if we sort of zoom out of that, and then you come on to actual fiction, you know, I don't think anyone's thinking that Twilight is real, for instance, or Harry Potter is real, or
well, give it a couple hundred years.
You know, hopefully we can get there where Star Wars is actually like, oh my god, right. You know, that's a thing.
We need to get that technology back. We need
where are the lightsabers? Where's the plasma? You know,
that's right.
So I mean, we might get there, and I guess maybe in that weird sort of sense, or even like you know, Fallout 3 in New Vegas, where they have like the this cult that sort of follow Julius Caesar, but then also like Elvis Presley, because he was like the king of rock and roll, and he's the king, and they also, you know, so maybe it will come to that. But you know, if you zoom out into sort of that broader sense of what fiction means, it's from things that aren't real.
Okay. So what would you say is the main reason that supports this belief and your confidence in it?
I think it's science.
Okay.
I really think it is. I think, you know, it's one of those things that I've got so many spiritual friends that really believe in this idea of like the other and the soul and this thing that is transcendent towards something that connects us all, which I think is true. But you know, I think people can be too rigid on science and almost become like nihilistic, that there is nothing, so everything is meaningless. And I was like, well, you know, there's still so much more we don't know.
Yeah.
And it's through that, and through keeping your mind curious, through this way of science and these things that you can study and observe, and things that are very real and tangible, I think really pushes and directs this compass rather than...
So anything specific in science that supports this belief?
No, more of just, yes and no. Like, I would like to say it's a certain study of like physics or chemistry or biology or anything like that, but it's all of them sort of encompassed together, that all of this information has not been bestowed upon us by a higher power.
Yeah.
It is all human curiosity.
Okay.
It's human ingenuity that has led us to be where we are.
Yeah.
And for all of the benefits and the woes, you know, there's terrible things that science has done. But when you look at medical science, when you look at the standard of livings that we now have, that compared to 300-400 years ago, a peasant would look up and see an airplane and be like, wow, is that a dragon? You know, and we can sort of say, no, that's human ingenuity. This is what we've done. Whether it will be our downfall, but that's another question entirely.
So why is science and human ingenuity a good reason to believe that scriptures are fiction?
Because none of it comes from human ingenuity. You know, if all of these things have been bestowed upon by this higher power, that they have come down and they've spoken to someone, or someone has done something and has been gifted this knowledge, this essence of being, it almost shifts that human presence into that higher power, which then almost makes it unattainable, because you're either chosen or you're not. And then it becomes an entirely different system. Then organized religion starts to come in, and now, we have to keep the churches going, so now we need to take a bit of money, and now we have lots of money, we can do this and this and this and this and this, and then it becomes this whole system of control. And you know, I think Hereditary isn't necessarily the perfect example of that, but really highlights that, that a lot of organized religion is about control, and science can be about control 100%. But it comes from a more rational perspective of the world, rather than this spiritual curation of what we think it should look like.
If you became convinced, hypothetically, that science was not objective, or was not, you know, just merely human ingenuity, would that reduce your confidence in the belief about scripture?
I don't know. I'm fortunate enough that no one in my family is religious, and this is one of those things that through this sort of exploration I've really looked at into people who come from religious households and aren't necessarily religious, but a lot of them will quite often say that they have a connection with God. And while they don't believe in Catholicism, Judaism,
Yeah.
Protestant, whatever, flavor you choose, they still have that personal connection with God.
Right.
And so I think if I was to be religious, that's more of the leaning I would have.
Oh, interesting.
Of this, I can't put a definitive finger to say that it is Allah or it is God or it is whoever it may be.
Yeah.
But I can say that there is something out there that in my hardest times, in my lowest of lows, and in my brightest of moments, they have been there with me. Rather than saying, going to this book, this is what I'm relating to, this is it,
Yeah. Why would that personal connection be a good reason to lower your belief, your confidence?
I guess in this hypothetical situation, it would be because it's something that I can sort of, don't want to insult anyone, but almost believe a lie in that aspect, that you haven't necessarily felt something real, but something within you has said that you felt something real. And so you're reliant on that synapse or that feeling or that emotion, that while it doesn't have any necessary physical effect in the same way that no emotion necessarily has a physical effect, but it's something you can feel. That is what would lead me to doing that. Once again, it would be a lie, but
but that's an interesting point, and this comes up a lot. What's more important to you, being factually correct or being comfortable?
Factually correct.
Okay.
And this is why it's really interesting when people, because you always get sort of preachers on the streets. There's a bunch of them that quite often congregate around the corner. And, if I was to believe in religion as I currently am, I would be lying to myself. It would be like saying that unicorns are running around the streets, but we can't see them. That witchcraft is real.
Have you been to Soho?
There are a few unicorns, but certainly not the mythical kind, that's for sure. But that's what it would be. It would be believing in this fictitious idea of the convenience of the way that life governs itself, rather than the exploration of the facts and the beauty within that certainty.
Is it always wrong to lie to yourself?
No, God, no. 100%. I would never tell someone to their face, that their God is a lie or anything like that. So, because, even though it's factually correct, you're still negating that human emotion for connection and desire. And that's wrong. That's a dick move. Like saying that to anyone is just like, who do you think you are that your position is somehow better than someone else's? You have your beliefs, regardless of what they are, and keep those towards you. But imposing that on someone else to say, well, I'm right and you're wrong, that's no longer this objective, beautiful exploration. You're now pushing an agenda. And that's a different conversation in itself, but from both sides, So, I think it's not wrong to lie to yourself. We're humans at the end of the day. When you look at trauma patients who quite often will black out because their brain just cannot physically deal with what it's dealing with, that's a form of lying to yourself. You can go through lots of moments in your life, even like looking back at memories. Very rarely are you looking at the memory and you're actually looking at the memory of the memory, which is a lie in itself. So there's plenty of times where our brains will do that.
Interesting.
But how do we know all of this? Through scientific exploration, through psychology and psychoanalysis, by realizing that our brain is not this perfect organism that is always right. It's that it's an organism and it gets things wrong and things are fuzzy. But that's the beauty. That you can sort of make your own memories in the way that you want to remember them. To lie to yourself in the way you want to lie to yourself. So,
If you became convinced that this belief that you have was not true, how might your behavior change?
Interesting. I don't know. I really don't know. I don't think it would. I think it would still be the same, but just under the guise of the spiritual presence rather than the guise of the exploration of science. I think it's still within the same position of so much beauty in the world that is to be discovered, and you just simply have to step out the front door. but rather than fact, it would be not. So, I don't think I would still impart that onto people if, like, something was to happen in their life. It wouldn't be like, there, God is always with you and that kind of stuff. Yeah. Like, I don't think I'd be like that, but I think I would probably be more open to entering sacred places. I think would be an interesting one. I just have no reason to go into a church. It's just as easy as that. And I think I'd be much more inclined to that. I don't think I would become like devoutly religious or anything like that, but I think I would be much more in that connection. But how it would shape my like sort of way of presence and being, I really don't think it would. Unless I, like contrarian, I'd be like, actually, I'm going to join like some fucking thing and just become a total, absolute nutter.
Call me up when you get elected.
I don't think it would change me. I think I'd still be the same, but just with religion in my heart rather than something else.
Cool. Well, Nick, it's been a pleasure.
You're very welcome. How does it stand up? Did I pass the test?
There's no test.
No test.
It's all about your exploration and kind of inspiring you to reflect. So,
nice.
Yeah. Do you have any questions for me?
I guess like
here's a card with a QR code.
Nice. What's your sort of like position? Not necessarily on religious, but like how did this sort of idea of doing this podcast really come about? Was it
there's a community of people who do this type of conversational practice, which is called street epistemology.
Cool.
Epistemology is the study of knowledge. Street because we do it for lay people. Okay. And it's also the course about it is called Navigating Beliefs, so that's why I have that on my shirt. I believe that people, I observe that people don't often think deeply about why they believe things. And I know that people's beliefs determine how they behave. And their behavior affects all of us.
100%.
Right? So I want to make sure if people are doing things that affect us, that they're reasoning through things in a rational way.
And have that level of critical thought and analysis that actually, that's really interesting. Because I don't really think people believe what they say. I think you really just sort of, you hear something, you just regurgitate it. And then every kind of sort of opinion just becomes this opinion of someone else that was probably of someone else. And which is kind of sad in a way. In like the age of the internet, like Google really isn't that difficult to navigate. And to sort of understand these things. Because it's interesting that you say beliefs, not necessarily just opinions, but something that is held
something that, the way I say it is something you're convinced is true. So a conclusion that you've come to.
And this is it.
Yeah,
it's an interesting one.
Cool.
Really cool.
Awesome. I have a bonus question.
Go for it.
Which is, I mentioned street epistemology, I mentioned navigating beliefs. We're playing around kind of with the language that we use to describe this process.
Cool.
If you could name the process we just went through in 1 to 3 words, what might you call it?
Objective, thought-provoking, hyphenated, so it's still one word. Exploration.
Nice. I like it. Objective, thought-provoking exploration.
With a hyphen.
With a hyphen, yes, obviously. Of course. To keep it within 3 words. I like how you're adhering to the letter of the law
to
there.
the T.
Yeah, that's right.
100%.
All right. Well, thanks much.
You're very welcome.
Enjoy your evening.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to Conversations on the Coast, a series from Washington State featuring civil conversations using street epistemology to explore what people believe and why. Find out more at streetepistemology.com. You can learn how to have these conversations in your own life at navigatingbeliefs.com.